Hello, it's Laurie, your blockchain Brad, and today we're talking about all things blank. And it's perhaps not the kind of blank you're thinking of, because we're thinking about all things wallet. We're thinking about all things non-custodial, and it all related to improving the privacy aspects of Ethereum when it comes to wallet experience. Now, more specifically, we are talking with the founder. His name is Aleksandras Gaška. Alex, thank you very much for being here.
Hi, Bradley. Thanks for having me. I have to say I've been personally following you for quite a while now. So it's a very humbling and honored experience to finally talk to you in person. Thanks for having me.
Mate, no worries. And likewise also, thank you for building. Thank you for being part of the conversation of people who are innovating, iterating on the blockchain. And in the name of transparency, it's important that all listeners know I am invested in Blank Wallet. And the reason is very simple. I am an advocate for privacy. And I also think that it's important that we do have access to private options when they do unfold on the blockchain. Now, let's talk about that in the context of privacy. Alex, you're the founder. Thank you for being here to really be the source of information. That's the value of the day. Now, you're clearly a privacy-centric, non-custodial Ethereum wallet solution, and we really do need that privacy, as I said, and we need certainly, innovation when it comes to non-custodial options. So do you want to touch on the term blank wallet, what it means, and why we need it?
Sure. So at its core, Blank is the most convenient privacy solution. We started with the idea, so I've personally been in this space since 2017, working and helping many projects grow. And the reason why I came up with Blank is it dates back to 2017, when I think at that time, when people spoke about blockchains, everyone was mentioning the word transparency and how transparency is cool and then going to be sort of the next powertrain for blockchains. I think that in 2020 we've seen a much different shift, in a sense that with DeFi trend emerging, a lot of people started to move their activity on chain, whereas in 2017 everyone sort of used centralized exchanges and services. And because of this sort of on-chain activity, people are starting to realize that, hold on a minute, with all of these actions on chain, people can see a lot more data behind me or sort of about me, right? Such as, how much crypto I hold, what coins I bought, right? Or where the money came from, right? So when we started, the idea behind Blank, when we started, is we looked at it from a very simple angle, which is what options does a user have, right? And we identified that right now, both of the options are somewhat, full of friction and inconvenience, right? In a sense that if you wanted to hide something, you could use a centralized exchange, right? And the hot wallet of a centralized exchange, but it still has friction, because you have to log in with 2FAs, withdraw and do the email confirmation codes and create new wallets and save keys and all that, all that process for what we believe should be, very simple, right? Because one of our, passions, or actually just the ideas that we have in our mind, is that privacy is a human right, and that it shouldn't be so hard to achieve it. And so on the other hand, what the user has is he can use solutions such as Tornado Cash, which is to date probably the most private solution on Ethereum. But still, we think that there's a lot of friction involved, right? In the sense that people have to save private notes, which if they lose access to their funds, right? So not only the private notes, but private keys to their wallet, right? Those are two different things. So and the whole process of receiving that privacy is very complicated and time consuming, right? So, a very clear answer came to our minds, is that, a lot of people want privacy, but they might not be going for it just because it takes so long to get it, right? And there's such a cumbersome process to get it. So the idea behind Blank is to build the most frictionless and convenient solution for users to get that privacy, right? And one of the aspects, and why we settled on a wallet, is that, by having a wallet, we're able to sort of control a lot of the convenience aspects in the key management, right? So one of the sort of innovations that we're doing is that users, when they create a wallet, they sort of save the private sort of seed phrase, right? And with that seed phrase, users are able to create multiple addresses, and even the private notes, right? All of which they're able to get that privacy just under a single seed, right? So you don't have to have multiple keys or save those private notes, right? All for the sake of that convenience. And so, one of the missions that we have in our minds is to make it so stupidly simple for a user to get privacy that he doesn't even notice that there are extra steps taken.
Okay, let me stop you there, because I think that's the catchphrase right now. Now, if you can make it so simple that it's almost that privacy is almost implicitly and surreptitiously almost embedded in it as a point of value, then you have something of a secret sauce, And again, I'm not saying this because I've invested in this. What's interesting is that obviously people the world over value privacy. There's no question of that. But fundamentally, they're looking for user experience. They're looking for seamless user experience. And we know, looking at the sort of pattern of usership right now, they are moving to other blockchains simply by things like cheaper transactions or for a more seamless experience, regardless of whether or not, perhaps they're affiliated with one particular platform or not. At the end of the day, the user does matter. So it's interesting that you say this, because, you've been forthright about some of those competitors, and we'll talk about them throughout the interview. But I guess it's also a case of working with, some of the existing wallets that exist out there, not just as a frame of reference as a competitor. Because I would imagine that with MetaMask, for example, with Tornado Cash, that in time, you'll also find ways to sort of synergize, to work with, because clearly, the key is going to be at that first point, attracting the users to something that's familiar. And I've had a look at your UX UI in terms of what's on the website, and it does look familiar, as you'd appreciate when we talk about MetaMask. So do you want to touch on that, familiarizing us with what we know, what we experience, and then having something that perhaps many of them don't have, and that is ease of access to privacy?
Sure. So there's a lot to unpack. I think one of the mentalities, again, how we plan to set out to build Blank is, we really want to take what works, right? In not in a sense of sort of copying, right? But in like, even when you think about smart contracts, right? The DeFi space has seen a lot of sort of hacks, just because it is so complicated to build those smart contracts that, if you sort of invent a wheel in a lot of areas, you have so many angles of attack that you can get. So the thought process behind Blank is to actually, take on what's open source and take on what's existing in the space and build on top of that if it has been time tested and time proven, right? So the same mentality is in when you mentioned about being sort of comparable to MetaMask, right? If you if I asked myself, what is the best Ethereum wallet out there, right? And the clear answer to me was, MetaMask, right? And I do see many developers building, mobile apps, for instance, or mobile wallets in particular, but it's I feel like it's a case of, developers building for themselves, right? I've personally never used a mobile wallet, let alone, to hold my crypto, right? Let alone interact with DeFi applications, right? So the thought process is actually, to focus on the user, on what they are doing and what they want to get, right? And so in that sense, Blank can somewhat resemble MetaMask, right? But what is becoming very apparent for us over, I'd say, the last month, is that when we came out of this stealth mode, because we've been developing for a few months now. When we came out of our stealth mode, we approached a lot of smart, brilliant minds of the space, investors, advisors, and so on. And there's a very clear trend that we've sort of received, which is that the long-term goal for Blank is to actually position ourselves as privacy liquidity infrastructure, right? And let me sort of elaborate a little bit on that. I feel like the most proprietary thing about Blank is going to be the smart contract and the privacy liquidity, just because the way that the privacy is achieved is the more transfers you have inside the smart contract, the more private the smart contract is. And so it's once we sort of set out and get our initial users, the money inside the smart contract becomes very proprietary. And the vision that we have is to actually take that smart contract and offer it to other wallets, right? So I'm often being asked whether Blank is a competitor to MetaMask, right? So as you noted, actually the long-term vision is to see other wallets as partners instead, right? And this is a very interesting topic. I'm sorry for jumping.
No, that's fine. It does sound like you're already thinking ahead with the likes of, for example, Tornado Cash, even MetaMask themselves, and clearly you're a visionary in that sense, and you haven't been building that long. So my question also in this context would be, I wonder whether or not you'll start to engage a dialogue with these, because you're just coming out of stealth. So it would be good to see, what does emerge here. But please go on, because it's interesting, what you're saying.
Sure. So to answer your question, to answer your question very quickly, the mentality that we have is instead to focus on building and sort of creating and launching, and then talking to those sort of partners in the space. So to be very brief, we haven't engaged with companies such as MetaMask yet, just because I feel like we may need to do a little bit more homework in terms of development, in terms of product release, and so on. So it's somewhat a little bit too early, right? But we've already actually spoken with other wallets out there, and so what I was saying before, the very interesting point to make here is that non-custodial wallets such as MetaMask, or many out there, at its core, they have a huge monetization issue, because what they're offering is a free service, right, which is a blockchain transfer, and they don't charge a fee on top. So many of those solutions actually have zero revenue streams, right? And so what we've seen MetaMask doing recently, which is a very interesting aspect, is they introduced an additional feature such as token swaps, on which they sort of charge a fee on top and take that as a revenue stream for themselves. So a few interesting points to make, right? Is that serves as a huge revenue stream for MetaMask, and I've read an article that it generates them about $100,000 to $200,000 per day in revenue, right? Which is a great numbers, right? And interestingly, what MetaMask does is they don't have their own DEX liquidity, right? They use sort of Uniswap or SushiSwap liquidity, and then just charge a fee on top. Right. So because of the DeFi space, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I feel like privacy is going to be a very emerging trend, and the more and more wallets are going to be interested in this sort of privacy liquidity infrastructure for a few aspects, right? A, getting that additional revenue stream. B, just offering their clients an additional very needed functionality, which is privacy. So as I was saying, the long-term vision is actually to take that smart contract and integrate with other wallets, right? So we've already spoken to CEO of Frontier Wallet, right? So we're doing a little bit of that, as you mentioned, reaching out. I think that it is very great to, in a sense, to start early, because then you can get the feedback that helps you to sort of craft certain aspects as you go. But at the same time, we don't want to approach some of the larger wallets just because we may not be ready for it, right? In a sense that we don't have a product ready and so on. Yeah.
Well, let me talk about that, like in terms of being an investor. Obviously, one of the things I wanted to find out more about is the roadmap itself, because one of the things that was clear to me in the research before I invested was that you are relatively new, and we're looking at some of those sort of well-established wallets with the brand. You're coming in, injecting another feature into this straight away with a very similar sort of platform experience potentially as well. But most importantly, building out towards a platform. You're going to bring in all these users, arguably. That's then going to enable you to build out more products as well. So I guess I wanted to ask you, do you feel confident, given that you're relatively new in the space? Do you want to touch on that for all of us to give us some confidence of where you're positioned and how long you've actually been building with your team, to know that you have the skill set, you have the technical prowess with your team to actually bring this forward to those kinds of goals that you want to achieve, to get to that point where you're something of the magnitude of the MetaMask, but with privacy built in?
Sure. So once again, many questions. Let me start one by one, right? Regarding the building timeframe, we started in November, conceptually wise, right? We've been building ever since then. In terms of the roadmap, we're looking to launch sort of a private or early or private access version this month, which is March, with possibly the public version being released next month. In terms of the team, those that are curious, I invite to see our website, right, which you can browse the LinkedIn's of our team members, and then many of them are well experienced. But in this regard, I'm very sort of fortunate and happy to be in the situation where I'm confident of the investors that we have on board, and also the advisory that we get from them. I always tell myself that I tend to sort of know nothing and then hire people that know the best, or just consult with the people that know the best, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be working immensely great so far, right? This sort of mentality.
Well, and Alex, we can talk about the backers. I'd love to talk about them in detail, but I wanted to touch more on your team and your position in terms of the roadmap on you, how you're building in terms of the code, in terms of the quality of your startup, because obviously the product is going to matter extremely so when it comes to the user experience. So paint us a picture of the readiness, as you're moving forward. Obviously it's early days still, but how confident are you feeling that you can get to market, you can get to that position where you can really engage with users? That's the roadmap I really want to find out more about.
Sure. So, in terms of development wise, there aren't any sort of issues that we see on board, right? The development is going quite nicely. We do have at the moment, 3 full-time developers and 2 part-time developers. Actually, as of yesterday, we actually hired another full-time developer. So
Mm-hmm.
4 full-time developers and 3 part-time developers that are all taking care of the technical side, as development and so on. So all of that is going quite nicely. As I said, we, for instance, our tech lead has been working as a consultant and sort of, freelance advisor for some of the DeFi projects over the last year, right? It's sort of more of a advisory relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So we're fairly confident in the development, right? I think that the more challenges would be present in terms of the business side, right? Such as user acquisition or the privacy liquidity, right? So there's a lot to unpack, and so let me sort of start dissecting one by one, right? Because the way that the smart contract works, and namely every sort of privacy solution on Ethereum, they achieve privacy in the same aspect, which is a single smart contract that serves just like a Mixer/Tumblr, where everyone's funds are pooled, and then you withdraw it to a new address in a way that it's not impossible to know what was the depositing address, right? So the way that it works, technically, beginning solutions have this chicken or the egg problem, that because of the fact that the more transfers you have inside the smart contract, the higher the level of privacy that you get is, right? So at the beginning, when you launch the solution, you effectively have 0 transfers, right? Which means that the level of privacy that you're able to offer is near 0, right? So a lot of the beginning privacy solutions have this, what you call chicken or the egg problem, right? Because no user wants to use a privacy solution that has near 0 privacy, right? And that effectively doesn't let you grow, right? So there are, a bunch of sort of different steps that we're taking to ensure that this is taken care of, right? I feel like actually this is probably the largest issue for Blank. So first of all, we are going, so Tornado Cash at the moment is probably the best sort of privacy solution on Ethereum, right? So, and Tornado Cash itself is actually open source, and they allow sort of relayer programs, right? So one of the first things that we plan to do is actually the V1 functionality of Blank is going to use Tornado Cash privacy smart contracts, right? And just like that, at the very beginning, we're going to be able to offer the same level of privacy that Tornado Cash does, except that there's a lot of added functionality that we're able to offer as a wallet, right? Such as convenience aspects, right? So the key management, private node management, right? And so on and so forth, right? And so, once we feel confident that about the amount of users that we have and their pooled liquidity.
Mm-hmm.
We want at some point to create our own smart contracts and then migrate all of the user base. But to ensure and to solve the privacy liquidity issue, there are few steps that we're taking, right? One is, like I mentioned, is we have strategic investors on board, right? Some of which have expressed the interest to provide that initial privacy liquidity in range of millions, right?
And that's the reason why you have some of those investors. We were talking about this pre-interview as well, in that there's a real benefit in having some of those sort of strategic capital firms supporting you because of reasons like this.
Sure. Yeah, and other than that, there's a very I'm very in a sense I'm very happy to come out with this product at this time rather than maybe 1 year earlier, just because there's a lot of more lessons that we can take from others and apply to Blank, right? So for instance, one of the more interesting things is using a token to incentivize liquidity, right? Which we've seen Uniswap do very well for their DEX liquidity, right? So one of the thought processes for us is to also use part of the token to not only ensure that fair distribution, right, but also to incentivize the privacy liquidity provision for Blank. Yeah.
Yes, and I do want to talk about the token specifically because obviously, see the emergence of tokens like, for example, with Uniswap, with their famous airdrop start, we've seen many other wallets come out with their tokens as well. So understanding the dynamic and the many facets of the utility value of that, I'd love to know more. But I really wanted to ask you, once again, going back to your own roadmap, when it comes to code, and transparency, when it comes to the risks of copycats, I want to just be straight up and ask you these questions about what are the risks with any of that potentially when, say, for example, there were code audits or code assessments, or if there were other teams that came in. One of the things I want to always ask new teams when they emerge, especially you, because you're relatively new, you've only been building for some time with your team, are there any pieces of code that you've used from other sources, or is this all your own work with your team to build this Blank wallet as you build forth? Because clearly you've already mentioned that you're planning on integrating and working with the likes of, for example, Tornado Cash. So is all of your code and that fresh? Is this something that's designed specifically to move beyond what's already built?
Sure. So to answer your question, like I said, the initial smart contract, for instance, is going to be Tornado Cash, right? But Tornado Cash itself has, like I said, an open source license, and one of the mentalities again that we're trying to apply to Blank is, rather than inventing sort of a new wheel, we want to take what works and what has been time proven. Right. One of the biggest sort of elephants in the room to address is probably the DeFi hacks, right? Especially for a wallet, right? Non-custodial solution. You want to ensure that the safety of funds is, of the highest importance, right? So, partially that's one of the reasons why we don't want to innovate the code as much, right? Just because, the way that Ethereum works is, if you create, new sort of functionalities and so on and so forth, it has a lot of angles of attack for DeFi hacks, right? So actually, in terms of the code itself, we want to stick to what has been time proven and developed and open sourced and already in the industry for so long, just to ensure the safety of funds. And rather than innovating on the technical level, we want to innovate on the feature level, on the convenience side.
Well, in that sense, obviously with DeFi, it's very pro tech as well, that whole community. What are your thoughts on the sort of the likely response of the DeFi community in the broader Ethereum network when obviously you're a proponent of privacy? They no doubt would be too, but they are tech savvy in that sense. So do you think they're going to support you? Do you think they're going to pick up Blank Wallet and really ride with all the different startups, the products, the builders, and make sure that you have a place within sort of the open DeFi dev space?
I mean, it's going to be obviously bias coming from my side, right? But I don't see a reason why not, right? I think that whatever. I'm not even sure if it matters on a technical level or at all, right? I think that what's most important if it works, right? And if users are able to use it, or if it does what it's advertised to do, right? If it is able to do privacy and achieve privacy and so on, right? So I mean I don't see any of the some of the issues why not, right? I guess sorry to interrupt you there. One of the I guess one of the bigger issues for the whole Ethereum ecosystem is the gas, right? Which is being addressed, with all the sort of gas token removal, refund, and so on. But I think that gas issue could probably be the largest threat to Blank. In a sense that now as we're conducting the interview, that sort of issue has been sort of at least today I've seen a very little gas price, right? But a few weeks ago when we see a lot of sort of the bullish market activity, then you have a lot of the expensive gas, right? So in the long term, for sure, that could be an issue, and there are many angles that this can be solved, right? I think that, but this is not only applicable to Blank, but the whole industry itself, Uniswap and Aave, Compound, and so on, right? The angles of attack, how to solve this problem, there are a few, right? On one hand, everyone is talking about layer 2 solutions, right? Which is definitely something that we're looking into. Optimism has been, very well sort of received in the community, or even separate blockchains, right? We've seen, Polkadot obviously has sort of the interest from the market. Then you have things like Binance Smart Chain, right? I with all my respect, I don't want to say anything, negative, but but even in this case, the issue is not, from my perspective, the issue is not how good the technology is or how low of gas, how cheap gas there is. I think that the biggest issue is the ecosystem, right? And this is, you take it back to 2017 as well. Everyone was talking about this or that, blockchain as the new Ethereum killer, right? What I've seen happen is that everybody sees it happen, right? Is that it failed to get traction just because Ethereum has a very similar chicken or the egg sort of, or other blockchains have a very similar chicken or the egg problem, where new developers, they don't want to build on a new blockchain because it has 0 users, right? And 0 users or no users want to use a blockchain that has 0 developed solutions, right? So you have this sort of ecosystem that's stuck in Ethereum, and nobody wants to get out of it, right? Because well, if I move to another blockchain, then I'm not going to get the liquidity of dexes, for instance, that I have in Ethereum, right? Or there are not many built solutions, and everything is happening on Ethereum. So for that reason, I wouldn't say I'm skeptical, but at this point, I'm sort of spectating where the whole industry moves, and I think that something is inevitable, right? So either the whole industry will move to sort of a layer 2 solution, but then things like Uniswap has to move, and so all of the user base moves, right? But my personal sort of expectation actually is that because of this immense challenge to go to a new blockchain, I think that maybe we're even more likely to see Ethereum 2.0, taking this sort of continuing this legacy, right? So my my answer to this whole gas issue is probably it's best to take a spectator's position and spectate where the shift is happening, and then following it very closely, right? Because it's sort of, in a sense, a little bit pointless for us to develop on a layer 2 that is not used at all, for instance, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, again, I wanted to go back to that point though. Obviously you want to make sure that you have chosen a platform that is predominantly the first mover when it comes to the smart contracts. It has all of the network effects, and as you pointed out, you're clearly open to the possibility of other key developments, key platforms, and key technologies. Even Plasm, for example, the work they're doing in scaling is quite significant for Polkadot. But I wanted to talk more about, you mentioned something interesting before about the technology, and you intimated that that may not be necessarily the core focus, but several other variables. But at the end of the day, the tech does need to talk, and whether or not you're utilizing what already works and building upon that. What I wanted to ask you is, if you're building and working with things that have already proven themselves, and you've referenced Tornado Cash as an example, why then establish something like blank wallet rather, as opposed to just contacting them and saying, look, we'd like to work with you, we'd like to help facilitate Tornado Cash, for example, or build out the wallets of others. Why do something different and build on what they've done and build something brand new?
Sure, that's a very good question. I appreciate that. So, I get, so first reason why blank, right? I mean, in general, I mean, why do we need a blank at all? And what is, why shouldn't people just use Tornado Cash, right? So I think that, as I mentioned before, the core value proposition of blank is sort of the added convenience and added functionality, right?
Yes.
I think that by doing it ourselves, we have a lot more control, right? So for instance, one of the future steps for blank is as well to offer, ERC20 token support, right? Such as WBTC, for instance. Namely, I expect it to be the first, introduced one that may need privacy, right, on Ethereum. Whereas this is not offered on Tornado, right? So if we were to sort of approach them, there's a lot more limitations that this is not a bad step per se. And I think that I see a lot of rationale behind what you're saying. At the end of the day, they're open source and they allow anyone to run a relayer, right? So in a sense, if for instance our own, introducing our own smart contract is going to fail for whatever reason, right? That maybe we're unable to, solve that privacy liquidity issue, right? I think that still, what blank can become is using Tornado Cash open source code and using their relayer program, running their smart contracts, in blank, except us then focusing on the wallet and additional features and so on, right? So for that, we still don't need their cooperation. I think that the sense, and just to sort of reiterate, the sense is that if we do it ourselves, there's a lot more control and a lot more flexibility in terms of the features that we're able to offer. But if it comes down to then using their smart contract and functionality, then for sure the way to go is to actually cooperate. That's right.
I see. So do you think Tornado Cash should be worried? You've intimated that they shouldn't. Clearly, you've intimated the possibility of integrations or partnerships. So given that you're sort of utilizing their technology and sort of developing from that and adding key features, as you've mentioned, and most importantly, that liquidity feature as well, you're going to be competitive. There's no question. You're going to, given the backers, given the position, given the sort of the Eurasia sort of connections that you do have with your team, you're definitely going to, inject a sort of a wave of interest in the space as well. But yeah, how do you think that they're going to react to that? And more importantly, how are you going to garner more attention and more users when we mentioned before that privacy isn't necessarily paramount to the user of the wallet? It is the secret sauce for you. So how do you get them to seamlessly make that switch, into what you're doing? Because ultimately you do want those users. Let's be real about that. You want to increase that user base. So are you going to be doing marketing to really sell the privacy element, or are you going to just simply keep driving forth on the utility and the ease of use of your wallet? I mean, really, I'd love to know how you're going to help educate about that integration value proposition with Tornado Cash as opposed to a competitor, and also how you're going to garner more users, not just because of the privacy, but because of the ease of the use of what you offer.
Sure. So there are a lot of different directions that we want to take, right? One is certainly sort of the exposure in the market, that influencer promote, sort of exposure and so on, right? Another direction is obviously, and this is, this is interestingly one of the reasons why we're launching a token, is that I personally believe that the initial user base for blank is going to come from our token holders, right? So getting the exposure there, I think that token community in general is a very great direction how to grow and get the feedback and to explode in a sense, right? then there are additional. So the fact that how we differ from Tornado is obviously the convenience aspect, right? We want to target, sure. So we are in a sense, probably a lot more of a competitor to Tornado than to MetaMask, right? As I said, we view MetaMask rather as partners, right? Tornado certainly can be a competitor in the privacy aspect. And I think that, it comes down to targeting their users, right? So, we can talk about, all of the general sort of marketing steps, such as, SEO or AdWords or things like that, right? Targeting, competitor names and so on, right? What I've particularly seen work in the crypto space is the so-called crypto Twitter, right? Where I think that it's a phenomenon on its own, right?
It's a beast.
And so personally, what I've seen work in that regard is, for instance, a referral sort of campaign, right? Where we've seen sort of derivative exchanges, such as Bybit, for instance, running a referral program, right? Where they partner up with sort of, Twitter accounts, and they're able to generate them a custom link, and if users sign up on that link, they earn part of the fees, right? So this is one of the directions that we want to take to sort of spread the word out. Right?
So you've got some smart marketers in your team, clearly, because that's quite an aggressive move. And we know from history that the affiliate links absolutely work. We've seen countless YouTubers do that too. So I'd imagine any of the YouTubers that are also supporting you as well will be doing something like this.
Sure, for sure. Yeah. So, and then, I mean, there are, just to sort of continue telling about those steps, right? Like I said, one of the directions that we want to take is obviously is following a similar approach to what Uniswap did with liquidity provision, right? Incentivizing with the token for providing, the liquidity. So in a very similar sense, we want to do that with privacy liquidity provision, right? And all of that, these, if you can call them farming or yield farming or something, right? This goes a great sort of length in the whole community, especially to those, wealthier individuals, right? I think that the very important note to make here overall about the product is I feel like there's a correlation between how much assets you have in crypto and what is your desire to get the privacy, right? So the more you have assets in crypto, the more you're willing to pay for that privacy, right? And I feel like, that's one of the reasons why initially we want to target the larger sort of whales or individuals who own a lot of crypto on Ethereum. And so, doing this sort of liquidity incentives program is in a sense a very good direction to make yourself known, right? Because every sort of wealthy individual in the DeFi space, they're looking how to utilize, and earn more on their holdings, right? So this is one of many different directions that we want to take for sure.
Got it. Well, it's good to know that you do have your own core, I guess, features, and you're building these out so that you do distinguish yourself as something unique. That's something I wanted to hear about. Now, one of the things I also wanted to talk to you about is just the backers themselves. We talked about also this pre-interview as we were about to start the interview. And I noticed that many of them do come from that Asia zone or Euro-Asia, but particularly Asia. And immediately my thought was, wow, this is interesting, because here we have a non-custodial Ethereum sort of centered and also privacy centered wallet. I would have thought naturally that I would have seen even some more of those big name investors come across from the US into support Blank Wallet. So I wanted to understand the reasoning behind this. Like, why is there such a strong Asian contingent? What's the reasoning behind this? And why were they the ones that noticed you in stealth?
Sure. Interestingly, I mean, I personally don't have an answer to that, in a sense that these were actually the investors that reached out to us from the very beginning, and that were really genuinely curious in Blank, in the technology, in our in our mission, and so on. And I asked myself this a little bit as well. And one of the answers that I was able to sort of dig out is that apparently the DeFi trend started in Singapore, right? And then it was sort of done by the community there, right? So I think that it's we've definitely spoken to a lot of investors from United States and so on, but I think it's just the nature of the fact that there are a lot more investors in the Asia region, right? Especially in the DeFi space. So it's not like we favor one investor over the other, and we just for some reason like Asia, right? I think it's very important to note that and this is what we had talked about pre-interview, right? Like there, I get asked a lot, why you sort of decided to have a lot of VC investors on board in the private sale versus doing sort of a community, expand, token round and so on. So it's very important to note that I genuinely believe that one of the most difficult tasks for Blank is going to be these partnerships and sort of these establishing ourselves in the market as that privacy liquidity infrastructure. So for that, it is very important to be well connected in this space and sort of being able to get the ability to knock on those doors, right, for some of the players. And I think that we have this now luxury of so many a very broad range of investors that actually don't even overlap themselves in their areas of expertise, right? So we have few investors that are very technical and they're able to help us with technical advancements and technical improvements, right? Then we have another group of investors who are very well sort of liquidity focused, right? And then the agreements that we have in place is that they're able to provide us, millions of liquidity in privacy liquidity once the product launches, right? And then we have other investors who are, very popular in just, investing and acquiring tokens in a lot of, portfolio sort of in a lot of companies. So all of that plays as a, Lego pieces in this, huge painting that we want to achieve Blank as a successful wallet product, right? So it is very important for us to have all of those, very sort of diversified types of portfolio investors, right?
Right. Well, I wanted to check also with you. I mean, have you locked these investors up? Because one of the things that many of even the proponents of DeFi, would advocate for is making sure that they have a long-term position in supporting you, especially if they're going to be involved in liquidity provision as well, like making sure that's a key resource for you. Nothing worse than seeing these pump and dumps that do exist in the space right now when it comes to, making sure that we inject trust, transparency, and confidence for the retailer for now and the future. Oh,
for sure. So, again, we realize that what's ahead of us is definitely, a very hard and hardworking and long period of time, right? Which is why one of the reasons what we decided to do is to lock and vest the investor tokens for 12 months, right? We've seen a trend, and we were actually somewhat by other investors, which we don't have on board, we were somewhat pressured to have a shorter, vesting period, right? But to me, that indicates that, the investor on board is genuinely there, either for money or whatever, right? We want to, and I'm very happy to say that, this is what we've done a good job on having investors on board that are purely, ecstatic about the product and they care about making us a success, right? So they don't mind the 12-month vesting because they care about us succeeding in the long term and then, being able to assist us versus, doing, a shorter period of vesting and then, selling the tokens and moving on, right? This is what I hate myself as well. And
Alex, I'm really happy to hear that, because obviously these investors or any investors at this point, even influencers, for example, could easily opt for, the 3 to 6 month vesting at fantastic odds, but the risk is that actual startup may be completely useless and have no merit at all, have no real team or have no real plan. And yet we do see some of these promotions happening now where there really isn't a lot of meat in the sandwich, isn't really a lot of tech guts to, to I guess the body. There's no real true engine built into the crypto startup. So hearing these lockups are in place means a lot to us, quite sincerely. And as an investor myself, I think that, as someone who's long-term, I want to know people around me are also long-term, even at the very early level of investment among these VCs. So can you touch on that just a little bit more? I know I'm digging now, but how do you have that confidence, though, aside from the lockup, that these really are there to support you long term and not just offer capital with the prospect of the 12-month returns for them?
Sure. So to answer your question, one of the things is so definitely this sort of investment partner search was genuinely a very big learning experience, right? And you're definitely after some time you're then able to sort of after you learn a little bit, you're able to identify, right? And I think that there are those that only, for instance, well, I don't mean to be the guy that sort of bad talks, right? But I guess you start to realize and differentiate from those that only talk and then those that do, right? So if you sit down and talk with a partner and you talk about the tech, and then he comes back with his suggestions, or he's then able to do a report and advise you on the tech, and so then you realize that this is genuinely the guy that sort of is helpful, right? And even if you write after you finished having the contract signed, he still comes back to you and he's eager to help you and does the introductions to other partners and so on. This is the guy that is a value add. Whereas the partners that you engage and you talk about only the monetary aspects, then you realize that he doesn't care about the project as much, right? If he talks about sort of the financial aspects.
So do you feel like you're one of those parties that are here genuinely for the long term? And obviously I mean that respectfully, because it does seem like a kind of obvious question, but I like putting the founders on the spot, because we do see that dichotomy between the short term founders, even in the space. You're happy just to do the quick 100x or the quick flips, and those legitimate founders who are all here with their team, aligned with all the right people, from backers to your influence, educational, whatever it is, but aligned directly for a long-term play.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm happy to say that sort of this space is somewhat corrected too in this regard, right? I mean, there isn't any more sort of these insane raises that sort of might have happened, in the earlier sort of years, right? Where then it's all about the fundraise, right? And then you can, we have had made our success and we don't even care about actually achieving product success, right? Whereas I think that the raises now are we're raising to develop, and we don't have any other choice, right? But to answer your question very directly, I mean, there is no other choice, right? I mean, this is why we've done so. I mean, this is why we've been so careful about the partners that we have on board, right? This is why, I mean, we lock the team tokens for 12 months and so on, right? There is no desire to sort of speculate on the token only. Or one of the lessons that I've learned from 2017 as well is that you can only go so far with hype, right? I mean, if you present your product on a hype basis, then it's a matter of months, if not weeks, when sort of all of that dies down, right? So there's a very clear answer to all of the sort of DeFi companies, is that you win by delivering long term, right? And by actually building and achieving your your vision and the users, right? I don't think there is now any sort of maybe except for a few sort of exceptions, if you look at top 100 or top 200 sort of tokens, there isn't any that are just pre-product or hype based, right? So the very clear answer is that we should go out there, build and acquire users, right? There is no, I mean,
there's no other option. So I wanted to ask you in that sense, and that's good to hear, because that's what every investor and every retailer wants to hear. Are you confident that you can really make a significant impact? Now, when I ask you that, I'm talking about users. Can you give us the kind of trajectory in the plan or the vision in terms of, I guess, uptake of the users, those kinds of numbers you anticipate? And give us reasons why, if you could, because we'd love to hear more about the sort of analysis that you've done with your team and what you think you can achieve, and even give us some comparisons if you need to.
Sure. I think that when we were doing the research, right, we clearly identified what the markets are, right?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, Tornado Cash right now has about, a little bit over 800 million worth of Ether locked, right? We know that there's, well, depending on what figures you see, maybe now it's decreased, but there's 17 or 15 billion locked in DeFi, right? Total value locked. And you dissect that and you sort of analyze what are the potential users of that area that want to receive privacy. And the figure that we came up with is sort of the total addressable market for privacy on Ethereum is about 3 billion, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of the sort of user projections, it's always sort of, one of the reasons why we chose not to do it is that I feel like it would be, it could be somewhat misleading, right? Okay. I feel like all of that is, it has 100 different variables on which your growth depends, right? And changing one variable might impact the strategy.
Right. Well, my apologies. I mean, perhaps that was just too vague of a question, but do you anticipate a significant influx in users? I guess that's what I want to hear, and the reason behind it, because whether or not you can estimate clear numbers, I guess that's not the key point. It's just giving us that confidence, as someone who's looking at this, or even if speculators are listening in, they want to also potentially play around with your prospective utility. So do you feel like you can be a really major player in this, is what I'm trying to ask?
Yes. And I want to sort of, my answer is somewhat, so, in terms of the wallet space, right? If we look at Blank as just a general wallet, right? It is hard to compete, and I feel like the wallet space is quite big, right? In terms of N+1 exactly solutions, right? What we do feel our strong point is certainly the privacy aspect, right? Mm-hmm. We are, I feel like moving forward, we will definitely be able to compete with Tornado Cash. And obviously our aspiration is to become better than them in terms of the privacy liquidity pool, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like, again, without having no intentions to, bad trash talk or whatever, mm-hmm. I feel like there are certain key mistakes that Tornado Cash has done. For instance, launching the governance sort of functionality of their token before they are able to sort of use their token for liquidity provision, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel like one of the key aspects for us definitely achieving that sort of privacy liquidity dream or vision is to use the token to incentivize, right? So, but again, this is the wrong direction. To answer your question very, very honestly, I feel like in terms of the Ethereum space, we do see Blank, or we want to see Blank as the #1 privacy solution, mm-hmm. just because we're able to offer a lot more features and a lot more functionality in the existing space, right? So higher convenience, higher selection of ERC20 tokens in the future, right? Added functionality and so on, right? So at its core, Blank is the vision is for privacy and even then moving forward, integrating ourselves with other wallets and DeFi solutions. So I do feel like there's a lot of room to grow in the privacy sector, and there are a lot of sort of low-hanging fruits there that I think that Blank has very high odds of taking.
Right. Well, that's what we want to hear as well. Now, in terms of tech, I wanted to touch on that just briefly. Now, some of the things that came up was interesting was that, there's the Tor integration currently, or has been, and you can touch on that, the Chrome extension references, but also the one that I liked was that in the future, you'll have the DeFi and Web3 integrations. So even though you're also working with key technologies, key code coming from other sources, I wanted to better understand these key integrations, understand what it means to embed Web3 into your own system as well.
Sure. So I think that in terms of the priorities, we've lately sort of changed it changed the level of priorities. Okay. I think Tor integration is going to come after the Web3 integration. I feel like Web3 integration is a very important aspect to our wallet adoption, right? In a sense that if users are not able to, connect their wallet to DeFi applications, then it's becoming less and less sort of useful, right? So there are key, strategies that we're taking. There is a little bit sort of confidential information from our side how we're going to achieve that. I can say that it's only in a few weeks time or a month time, once we actually go in and achieve that, users are going to be able to see that.
Okay, so are you working with Web3 now, with the Web3 Foundation, or are you working with Polkadot, or are you working with any scaling solutions? I mean, who are you working with? Can't tell me.
Sure. No. So the Web3 Foundation and the Web3 connection is those are very sort of different directions, right?
Okay.
In terms of the foundations and the organizations that we're working on, we're not. That's not what we're doing now, and that's not something that I feel like should be our focus. Right now, our focus in terms of the development is all product focused and updating our features. When I mean the Web3 sort of connection, what we mean is that sort of when you go to Uniswap and you click connect wallet, right, is the thing that would say connect with blank is sort of called the Web3 connection, right? So in that regard, there are a few sort of innovations that we're trying to achieve. In the long term, one of the obviously the sort of business development factors that we want to do is obviously having this sort of separate, a blank wallet button, right? But there are, that is a very sort of business development wise and time wise, a very long process and sort of very time consuming to go to each website and ask them to put on blank. So like I said, there are some technical innovations that we're doing to sort of shorten this, right? And make it so that this is much easier to collect blank everywhere, from the very beginning. But to answer your question about Tor, so one of the also sort of thoughts that was on our mind is that what is there much to offer besides the privacy smart contract, right? If you take MetaMask and blank, right, from the beginning, at the beginning, the idea was that we just offer the privacy functionality, right? The privacy smart contract. Now it's again, and the reasons for Tor integration is that, well, few thoughts, right? So first of all, besides Tor, blank does not track its users, right? MetaMask collects data about their users. I think you can still opt out if you don't want to, but when you sort of sign up for MetaMask, they ask you whether you want to share your data, right? We understand how sensitive your data is. So from day one, we're not doing any of the tracking, right? When it comes to Tor integration, it also very interesting aspect, which I believe that not a lot of people know about this, is that once you connect with your wallet to any website, right? So let's say you connect to Uniswap with your wallet. Uniswap is able to see two pieces of information, is your wallet address and your IP address, right? So if they want to, if you connect with a different wallet with the same IP address, in theory, they can connect and know about you, what is your IP address, what other wallets you connected, and so on and so forth, which is, a sensitive sort of topic in terms of data, right? Especially if you connect to those, more malicious DeFi sites, right? That end up sort of doing bad things, right? So, the thought process is to integrate Tor on blank so that every single time you use blank, your IP would be different, right? Well, now you would say, well, what's so different between me using a VPN, right? Well, the core difference is that, Tor changes your IP every single time. So even if you connect a second time, your IP now is different, right? Whereas if you use a VPN, most VPNs are sort of static and they use the same IP address. So it doesn't change the fact that, so they're able to still identify it if you use a VPN, right? So that's why we feel Tor functionality is very needed. Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you about regulation as well, because with the elements of Tor referenced, and even just the statements about the government that I've seen referenced in the website, I wouldn't say in any respects you're anti-government, but certainly you want to move away from some of those centralized government controls. So how do you sort of get around the challenges of regulation and compliance, when obviously you want to make sure that you can be global. Where in the world are you not able to, I guess, function? I mean, you're a wallet, so you're relatively global in that sense, but are there any preclusions or any exclusions as well?
Yeah. So actually, very great question. I get this a lot, and I want to sort of explain that. So first of all, we are a non-custodial wallet, right? So what comes to us, right? I mean, it's not like we are holding your sort of crypto, and
No.
we don't have to do a KYC on every single customer and things like that, right? Very interesting aspect is that one of the sort of issues that you could think of, for instance, if you use Monero, right? If you use Monero and you take the money and you send to a centralized exchange or somewhere, those centralized exchanges might ask you, to show proof or show some information, submit documents to prove that you're not doing money laundering or any of that activities, right? So the beauty is that, Blank is doing this sort of proof of funds report, which basically means is that users are able to, with their private node, they're able to generate a report which sort of gets rid of the privacy functionality and is able to say, well, this is where the money came from, this is where it's sent, and so on and so forth, right? But the user sees it sort of, he sees the report, and then he gets to choose where or who he wants to show the report to, right? So if I use Blank and I withdraw, the Ether, and I send it to a centralized exchange, and all of a sudden the centralized exchange asks me to show proof, I can generate the report, show proof to the centralized exchange. But at the end of the day, when you look on the sort of Etherscan or on-chain explorers, the transaction would still remain private, right? But I, as a user, would then choose who do I want to show my data to, right? Versus the whole world being openly seeing sort of, all of the information, right? So in that sense, Blank is compliant, right? And if somebody asks for that information, you get to decide whether you want to show it or not, right? And you get to decide who to show it for. In a sense of, there's a whole different another discussion, for instance, privacy coins being delisted from centralized exchanges. Right?
That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Is there a risk of you not being supported by some of the sexes or the centralized exchanges, or even any exchange really, because of the privacy element? And
the core answer to that is that, at its base, Blank token is not a privacy token. We are an ERC20 token, right? So the risks that you get for privacy tokens, you don't get any of those risks for Blank token, right? Just because we are,
but
so the Blank is a smart contract, right? And the token is not related, right? So
well, I understand that, but can I just jump in and ask you though? I understand that it's an ERC20, but it does, on your website, you do reference the government, you do reference non-custodial sort of controls, putting it back in our hands. And we've also saw the backlash of things like Libra, which is now DM, and many other sort of responses to the likes of anything that was privacy related for Bitcoin. So do you think that, you're going to have no problem with the compliance and regulatory aspects of this, because you clearly do want to make sure privacy is injected into this? Could it be problematic in any way, or because, again, you referenced the smart contract nature of this, referenced the Ethereum nature, the fact that it is non-custodial, do you think you're going to have no problem?
So I want to make a very clear statement about the whole government thing and things like that, right? Under no circumstances do we promote sort of tax evasion, money laundering, or any of the illegal activities, or anything that you're not legally obliged to.
Okay.
Right? The whole idea is that there's a big room where you have a lot of excess data that you don't need to provide, right? And that in our opinion, you're doing a bad decision by freely providing, right? So the government overwatch is, in a sense, like, it's sort of a point to make that, it's just, providing unnecessary information about yourself that may end up biting you back in and this is sort of, so not this could, I mean, government overwatch is a whole different thing, because we don't know what are the regulations going to be in the future. But for instance, one of the things that you can learn from 2013, I think, is that at that moment, Coinbase, for instance, blocked any Bitcoin deposits that would come from gambling sites, right? So, and they're able to do that because they're able to see the whole blockchain and where the Bitcoin came from, right? So, in one sense, we feel like this is something that our users should be able to get, is that extra level of privacy, not showing to everyone where the money came from, right? In terms of the regulation, like I said, I mean, there are two levels of regulation: the token itself, which again, like I said, is not a privacy token, so we're not worried at all. And then there's smart contract regulation, which, as I said, some might want to sort of some exchanges or centralized services might want to want to know more. Sorry, but in that regard, all the responsibility goes to the user, right? Whether he wants to provide that data.
I see, and that makes a lot of sense. And that non-custodial aspect makes sense as well in that context. So, what about exchanges? That you can tell us, you're the founder. You no doubt want to have increasing liquidity. DEX or otherwise, in that sense. So is there a roadmap for that you can tell us more about? I mean, have you started liaising with different exchanges, or are they liaising with you? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, given that you do have a token, and there is certainly going to be a launch pad that comes up we'll talk about soon as well?
Sure. So one of the, we have to talk with one of the largest exchanges out there. Without naming the names, I think it would be unprofessional to sort of start speaking about it before the hands are shaken. I think that the general notion is that we've gotten from those really sort of big exchanges that we want to first launch the product and sort of get users acquired just to prove it to them, which, by the way, goes back to your whole thought process of that we're here long term, right? So and these are becoming the sort of industry standards, and then totally I get that, right? So one of the sort of notions that we've gotten is that Blank has to launch its product and start establishing ourselves in the market.
Yeah, you've really got to start pulling your weight and prove your utility.
Exactly. But I think this is sort of when you look into other tokens, I think this strategy is somewhat done, with many of the bigger sort of or more known sort of tokens, right? The strategy is to list yourself on Uniswap, trade there for a month or 2 or 3 months, and then sort of increase the liquidity and exposure.
Yeah, so many do it this way. Right, exactly.
So it's definitely not an exception that we do see, especially for the token adoption, for the product adoption. It's very healthy to have the exposure of centralized exchanges, and then the notion is that we really want to do it, but it will take time and take place a little bit later. Yeah.
Got it. Well, let's talk about the token, and then we can move across to Polkastarter. That is the launchpad I wanted to talk to you more about. Now, the Blank token itself, I wanted to understand better some of those key functionalities, those key features. They're referenced in the information and literature about service fees, about privacy fees, and many other things like that. So I wanted to better understand, firstly, without talking about sort of the tokenomic design or talking about the distribution, those sort of number crunches, is really just understanding just all the different facets of the value of this token, because obviously making sure it's needed and properly used as fuel for the Blank wallet has to be really unpacked to give us all the assurance that this is a legitimate token doing real deal things.
Sure. So there are 5 directions where the token is used, and it's very, very different, right? Starting from the fact that, when I mentioned about referral systems and so on, these are going to be only paid in Blank tokens, right? So if we end up paying, in the program, the token gets the utility aspect by being sort of used as the monetary aspect, right? Utility. Then you have things like discounts for token holders in terms of fees spent, right? So because of the privacy smart contract sort of technical aspects, it's really hard to sort of implement technically. But the notion is that for the privacy smart contract, users have to pay a fee.
Mm-hmm.
And if the depositing wallet would hold blank tokens, they would receive a refund, a partial refund of the fee spent in a form of sort of blank tokens as well, say every month or so. Right. Then the third aspect is early access and exclusive functionality for token holders. So like I mentioned, we're thinking of launching sort of closed early access version of Blank Wallet this month. So we are discussing how that may only be available to sort of token holders, right? That hold a certain number of tokens. Or for instance, you may be able to create 5 addresses on a wallet, right? Without holding tokens. And if you wanted to have more addresses in a single wallet, you would have to hold more tokens, right? So those are sort of the beginning.
So it's almost a staking sort of model.
Sure. And then I feel like the next two are the more sort of interesting, part of the token model, right? Which is in a sense, revenue sharing, right? So one is that a third of the fees that are earned from Blank smart contract are going to be going to be used to purchase Blank tokens and burn them, right? There's a lot
like the BNB model. So obviously it reduces supply.
Sure. There has been a lot of discussion in our team, and we're still leaning towards the burn model. I think there are 2 camps which say, instead of burning, maybe you should store it in the company reserve, right? But so far, what we've decided to do is just burn them instead.
Right. And it's important, obviously, to get these information, down pat, so people can know, because obviously we want to make sure that there's no challenges put forth in terms of, I guess, compliance and regulation once again. Because we want to make sure that doesn't compromise in any respect your utility. Sure.
Yeah, and then forgot to mention the 5th aspect, which is using another third to incentivize the liquidity provision, right? Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned at some of the point, that at the beginning we won't have our own privacy smart contract. So then part of the fees earned would be used to incentivize the ETH/Blank token sort of Uniswap liquidity provision, right? And then once we have our own privacy smart contract released, we want to migrate the incentives from Uniswap provision to privacy liquidity provision of our own.
Got it. Well, that's good to know, because obviously we want to make sure that you've got a whole roadmap to act, just even in this respect with regard to the token. You've clarified many of the different utilities built into that. I wanted to also ask you about Polkastarter now, because that sort of marries in quite well with the predominant Asian investors that you do have. Polkastarter itself, connected to Ethereum, as you know, but had immense success in terms of those fast moves. Now, you're 68 times oversubscribed, as I've read on Twitter. So I wanted to ask you about the hype. Is it because of Polkastarter's huge success that they've had with all kinds of tokens in an immediate sense? Is that the reason why you think you're 68 times oversubscribed, or what else is going on here? I mean, how did you achieve that when you've just come out of stealth?
Good question. Very good question. I think that like I said, I might be biased here again, right? What's in my mind might not be actual reality, right? I in one sense, I really hope that it's because people are ecstatic about the product, right? That they're ecstatic that a privacy solution like this is needed in the space, right? I guess it would be, if I have to be objective here, I would also probably outline the market conditions, right? Is that we've seen sort of a little bit of large market interest lately, right? And that could have attributed to it, right? That all the sort of large caps going up, attracted a lot of eyes and a lot of money in the space, right?
Well, it's interesting because, you haven't even come out yet of the blocks. So, to have that kind of interest is quite remarkable, but it does suggest to me, again, that there's real power and there's VCs, there's real power in the network that you've built. Most likely the networking of marketing plans as well. There's a lot going on here. A lot of FOMO in the back end before you even come out. So congratulations. And I even looked at the different names of those VCs. So if anyone can go and see them, I recognize some of those names. And it's basically, well-known VCs, I suppose, in that Chinese arena or in the Asian arena. And Singapore, you mentioned, was a big stakeholder too, in terms of just legitimacy of building out your plan. So yeah, the dynamics are changing. Clearly, there are new investors coming in as well. They're really supporting startups like you, and you seem very confident. But what's happening specifically? And that's what I wanted to get into with the guts of Polkastarter. Now, in terms of the actual raise, we're talking about 120,000. Not a great deal in terms of that public access point for the Launchpad. So do you want to talk to us about why it is so low compared to obviously the 1.8 million private raise?
Sure. So, the 1.8 private raise is that in some sense, because we felt this oversubscription, we wanted to have, we identified a lot of strong partners on board, right? Those that actually, want to contribute and help Blank succeed. So interestingly, we had this issue of, we had to limit down where they come with a request to invest a lot more money, and we simply don't have the space for them to fit in, right?
I see. So you could have filled this. You could have filled it really easily with just a few people.
That's right. And one of the ideas that we wanted is to have actually, as larger number of investors, just so that they help in a lot of other sort of areas of expertise, right? In terms of the public, so in some sense, the private raise was when we identified how much money is needed for the development and for the implementation, right? We raised more in a sense to actually, like I said, fill those partners and make sure that there's a little bit more room for us to increase the odds of success, right? But in terms of the public sale, right? I mean, the thought process is that after we close the private sale, is that we know that we have enough runway to do this, right? So there isn't such a big desire to get that that much more money, right? Because we care about I don't want to raise a lot more money just for the sake of it, right? I think that we we sort of explored, right? It's all about delivering and building and so on. So we don't want to raise more money just for the sake of it.
Exactly, and
so, I guess that was the mentality.
It makes sense, and you now have runway because of that investment. Those investments that did happen, and interestingly too, you've got a relatively small Polkastarter. I think also that will create significant hype, to be honest, because we've seen the examples of these in the past. There hasn't been a lot raised in these Launchpad scenarios. So let's be real about this as well. Alex, it's clear that the performance of the Polkastarter Launchpad has been very, very, it's been remarkable, really. The kind of 100x or the 50x or 20x. So you can't speculate on price, but surely you must be excited just based on looking at the last few months, just in terms of getting a launch.
Look, the token price speculation and something is in a sense none of my interest, right? That's not what I'm here for.
But in terms of attention, I'm asking about.
So let me be very clear, and we've been presented with a lot of options where to conduct this sale, right? Especially the current market has a lot of competition for Polkastarter, right?
Okay.
But what we identified, and the reason why and it's not about sort of getting the desire and the choice for Polkastarter. It's not because of getting the hype, but it's actually we identify ourselves as a product for crypto users, right? So for us, the better exposure we get in terms of having more token holders, right? Because as I said, we expect that majority of token holders are going to be our users, right? For me, it cares how can we increase our odds of getting more users and having more product success. And the clear answer is getting seen by more eyes, right? And getting the sort of the most noise in terms of so in a sense the reason for IDO and Polkastarter versus somewhere else is that I feel like Polkastarter has become this sort of an industry standard where there are a lot of sort of now it sort of becomes like a benchmark, right? Where everyone quotes Polkastarter projects and does the list and so on and so forth. So like I said, our intention is to simply get it seen by most eyes, just because we know this, this clicks in users' minds, and when they know about Blank, then the fifth time they see it as an advertisement later down the road, the likely they're going to install the wallet and use it.
Right.
So
okay. And what about KYC AML in that sense? Because obviously you're privacy centric as well. And it seems like a bit of an absurd question perhaps, but are you an advocate more generally in the space of KYC AML? Because there's one thing to do KYC, another thing to have privacy embedded technology. And you touched on this before indirectly with your reference to, a privacy coin. So do you support some startups who are really trying to build out transparency, build out that they're following, the rules of the day, the country, perhaps related to the startup itself or many of the countries? What is your position on, the risks of money laundering, the risks of malacting? And that happens across the board. That can happen with real money and fiat. We know this, but I'd just love to know, your position, given that you're pro-privacy, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're, like you said, anti-government or anti, KYC and AML in the right context.
Sure. So, like I said, our position is that by no means do we want to sort of disobey the laws, right? And it seems like the, KYC and AML, given the sort of the nature of cryptocurrencies, how they're easily you can easily transfer them and so on. It seems like, KYC and AML is definitely becoming a trend, right? I guess, from my personal sort of opinion and value observation, I guess, the fact that, the whole idea behind Bitcoin and all that is, as you said, it's a little bit of that, we hate the government and, we're rebels.
It certainly was.
Right? So
it certainly was until we saw the SOV narrative come out.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So, I have this a little bit inside of me, right? But those beliefs, they're not, product and company focused, right? I think that the point to make here is that, we're, like I said, we want to obey the laws that will come to place or that are in place, but we still, even if there are laws in place, like I said, there's a lot more room where getting the privacy can solve the issue, right? I mean, even if you have, there isn't probably now an exchange where you can't trade if you don't do KYC, right? So it seems like, the whole KYC trend is coming, and we may not have an option to,
I see. So it's really a case of working with the best of what we have.
I think so. But, still in that sense, like I said, there's a lot more room where you could benefit from privacy, right?
Yes.
And particularly, there's a whole, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but one of the, more interesting reasons why, we came up with an idea for Blank is that by doing these on-chain transactions, you leave a lot of data behind, right? So like we've seen, for instance, Zeus Capital, the ones that they bought advertisement on Twitter that said, short link or something like that, right?
Yes,
they made the mistake where somebody, I think I saw a tweet on Twitter that somebody was able to identify their wallet address, and they basically shared their on-chain short position, and they said, well, this is how much they're holding, this is their liquidation price, and they shared that address on Twitter, and everyone pushed the price up, causing them sort of short squeeze, right? So and then you have a whole nother story with sort of VCs or something, right? You have like what is it, Polychain, that bought YFI tokens, right? They bought YFI tokens on chain, and everybody knew that it was Polychain, so everyone was like, oh cool, this is VC buying it, and this is so nice. They were able to see the on-chain.
There were quite a few actually that got involved with YFI.
Yeah, but the what's interesting, I feel like I think we've yet to see what's the opposite case of that going to be, right? When they decide to exit their position, I think it's going to cause a negative reaction because of this sort of transparency, right? This may cause some panic.
It's a very good point. But, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because, that transparency can be something of a boon for the community, especially when it could actually result in a dumping scenario. So I really wanted to ask you about that, because there sometimes can be a value prop for transparency, me being an advocate for transparency and privacy. So when do the two play out to be valuable in different scenarios? When does privacy really mean something for value? You see what I'm saying? Is that sometimes in crypto we want to see that transparency.
And this is a conversation that I had, right? I mean, if you're at the other end where you're monitoring, on-chain transactions, and you want to see what whales are doing, and you want to make trading decisions based on that, then obviously you're sort of a standard of transparency, and you would love to get this data, right? But if you're on the other side of the fence, and you are the one that is being exploited, and you have a lot of funds, and you can't move them without everybody noticing, then obviously you want privacy, right? So it depends on which side you're on. I understand what you're saying, right? It's maybe but I think that at the end of the day,
it's about rights.
You can have a lot of hypotheticals, hypothetical sort of scenarios and so on, right? I mean, my mission here is to actually help those that want it, right? I think that, and as somebody else has pointed out, right? You might think that, well, blank is going to be used by bad actors, right? There's going to be, all those hackers are going to use blank and so on. So there are already existing, privacy solutions, such as like we explored, Tornado Cash, right?
Exactly.
So, we're not doing anything to promote the hacking or to help the hackers out, right? I think that especially given sort of the product features, we're more aiming to the everyday user, right? And to everyday sort of trader or the DeFi investor that benefits from these features.
And what's clear also is you're going to have, I would imagine, quite a few crypto influencers going to be supporting this as well, because many of them are just pro-privacy, listening to their content. So I'd expect that to unfurl. Now, when is this Polkastarter launch? I'd like to know more about that, because obviously as an investor, I think naturally, given the hype of the launch pads, it's interesting. But again, for me, it's so much less about the launch pads themselves generally, and so much more about proof of utility, proof of really proving your worth for the months and years to come. But let's not kid ourselves. I mean, the Polkastarter, like we alluded to before, the Polkastarter Launchpad has made a name for itself, for various reasons. And it's coming soon, isn't it?
Sure. So our launch is going to be on March 5th, which is Friday. So this Friday, we don't have the sort of a specific hour yet. That's something that we will sort of communicate on our Twitter or Telegram. But yeah, the day is March 5th.
And what's interesting also is that there's initial supply of liquidity on Uniswap of 240,000. It's a 120, so half of that is the total value of the Polkastarter cap. So yes, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting, I think, watching this unfurl, because as we've read on Twitter, 68 times oversubscribed. That's crazy. But I like hearing from you, to be honest. All the things you've referenced subsequent to that, that seems to be where you're excited, is continuing that process of building, continuing that product, and more importantly, that platform, building that where you can immersion showcase how you do differ, how you do offer, key and fundamental differences to others.
For sure. I mean, like you said, let's not kid ourselves, right? I think the blank is nothing if we're not able to achieve that success in terms of privacy and users, and that's the only sort of focus on our minds, is to get out there, build, and get those users and offer them privacy and convenience. Absolutely. That's the only sort of. Yeah.
So what do you think about the risks and challenges? What's some of the things on your mind? Because obviously trying to be objective and paint a real full picture of this before we finish the interview, what are some of the risks do you think, you're facing as you build this out and unfurl beyond Polkastarter, because that hype will happen, but, surviving that, thriving through that, having that trajectory up that's based on, real planning, that's what we're hoping to see. So what are the risks and challenges in launching in this way and starting this way, and even working with some of the technologies like Tornado Cash, for example. There must be some key challenges that you're facing now.
Sure. So one of the, we try to also stay objective, and we've written a white paper which does involve sort of risks that we foresee and how we plan to mitigate them. So for those that are interested can read on to that. But I think we did a good job today sort of addressing all of that, right? I think that the biggest issues is either gas or, privacy, liquidity itself, right? Besides the most frequent, DeFi hacks, right? All of which I think we covered. And I think that these are sort of the largest issues, right? Like I said, I think that, most of it all, what I'm very happy about, just to reiterate, right, is having those, very experienced investors on board that have gone through those challenges with similar, or other portfolio companies that have helped us in, coming up with the strategy and go-to market strategy, the user acquisition strategy. So I feel like we've, with them, we have sort of quite well increased our chances of success.
Got it. Well, it sounds like you have all kinds of strategies built in. I'm looking forward to seeing how this unfurls, to be honest with you. The Polkastarter is really just the start of the token awareness, the token experience, and the token sort of becoming public. What's far more exciting is the privacy injection, into that non-custodial wallet environment for Ethereum. Agnostic is the big question as well. I want to ask you in that, yes, it's Ethereum, that's built into the mantra, built into the slogan, but is it, the cross-chain elements, the potential for more? Are you open to that in the future?
Oh, for sure. The reason why we chose Ethereum is, like I said, again, choosing this mentality of what works, right? Ethereum, still in my mind, is the largest, DeFi ecosystem, right? So we want to go where it works, where it has the largest usage, and that shows that they need privacy, right? We're definitely agnostic. I don't see a reason why not to be agnostic, right? And
all technologically doesn't make sense.
Right. All we care about is getting to the end user, providing him privacy, and solving his pain points, right?
Right.
If there's another blockchain or another layer 2 that does come out and then get all the usage that needs privacy, we're going to be there first to get to those users.
And it could be a case of when rather than if, because we know that there are others that are definitely building now. And what's great is that you're positioned to take advantage of that when the time arises. And there's never going to be a time when privacy doesn't matter. That's the reality as well, Alex. So thank you so much for your time, mate. It's been a very long interview, and my apologies, if I do look tight, it's only because it is the middle of the night for me, but I've really tried to make sure I've kept up with you throughout this interview, because it is so fascinating to hear the kind of movements that you've made, the kind of developments of your team. And if you'd like to know more, for those listening, you certainly can go and look at that team, because I didn't go and itemize them or discuss each of the members in detail, but I did look. And you can also certainly go to the links below of other various social channels. But Alex, is there anything you'd like to finish off in terms of closing statements that you feel encapsulate the value of Blank Wallet as you emerge? And obviously, I do wish you the best, because you're doing something where clearly people want it. Clearly, there is a demand. But most importantly is that you're melding and working with other existing startups to, I guess, better the blockchain, offer more services and products that essentially gives us more choice.
Yeah. Like I said, we're here to make privacy stupidly simply accessible, right? It's a human right. So we're here to make it, as convenient, as frictionless for everyone. And yeah, I don't think there's doubt that privacy is needed, and we're here to change the industry in that. So it's been a true pleasure talking to you, Bradley. I really appreciate your time, and as well as very, very interesting questions. So thanks for having me. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching.
No worries, mate. So, just to recap, we've got Polkastarter coming. Why not let you know? I did invest. It's important in transparency. 5th of March, that's happening. And most importantly, make sure you follow through with all of the, updates, the key developments, if you are interested in learning more about Blank Wallets developments and, I guess, technological achievements, as they move forward and start to showcase, most importantly, those products. So just a reminder again, their slogan is all about being privacy centric. That privacy centered, non-custodial Ethereum wallet. Ethereum, that's the starting point. Who knows where this is going to go, but it's certainly going out, spreading, moving forward in the future. Looking forward to seeing how the team does this. And hopefully, Alex, we can catch up again to speak more on this as you start to emerge. And certainly after the Polkastarter hype, I'd love to talk to you, months down the track and see how you're going, see how the team's tinkering and how you're developing and iterating. Because at the end of the day, we want to see that long term. And you've made it clear that your whole team, all your backers, and even all of hopefully those influencers that are coming forth on this, is backing this, I would guess, are all aligned in that vision. So I wish you all the best in that, mate. And I certainly be watching as an investor, and certainly also as someone who's an educator in this space, to see how you go.
That's right. All the hard work is in front of us. So yeah, thanks for having me, Bradley. I hope to talk to you soon and then share the progress as we go. Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome, mate.